Gerds, what do you think?
Well, what I learned from last night's game, and I guess it confirmed it for me, is they just don't, and if I'm going to make an analogy to car racing, they don't have that top-line speed that they need. That's what I got from that last night. Like when Walker, when Mitchell, when Murray, when Cook, when Reynolds, when those guys put the foot down last night and said, okay, you guys are playing for a top 4 spot. We've won 8 in a row. We're rolling on. This is what you're going to come up against with the good sides at the back end of the season. What have you got? They didn't have anything. And that confirmed for me that they don't have the roster to go on and win a premiership. They haven't for the last couple of years. And everyone says, oh, it's pressure and it's big moments and they don't handle it. They fall away at this time of the year. And I just believe they don't have a roster good enough to compete with definitely the top 2 sides. And if you're not calling South one of the top 3 all of a sudden after 9 in a row and the performances they're putting in, surely they're very close to it. And Parramatta just at this point in time don't have the cattle. They don't have the experience at the back end of the year and in representative games that you need to understand the moments in those games. I think when Mitchell Moses clicked into gear last night with about 20 minutes to go and a couple of guys went with him, they looked like they could have done something had they done that from the start. But that's not as easy to do as when you've got a side that have already won the game and they relax a little bit and things can happen at the back end of games. And South do allow that more than some of the other sides. But it just confirmed for me last night that they just haven't got the roster for it.
Yeah, well, everything Gerd said, he's hit the nail on the head, and it's that top, that's that X factor that they lack at the moment that is really evident. You look at the top 3 teams; they've all got match winners from everywhere. They score, Manly, who aren't in the top 4, but it's imminent, you would think. Even the Roosters, who are punching above their weight this year with the amount of injuries and retirements, and each week they turn up and they give something. But Parramatta off the back of 2 losses, you think, okay, last night I was watching, I'm going, okay. Within the first 10 minutes, you knew they were going to get beaten. They just didn't turn up, and that's a really worrying sign for a side that's been in the top 4 for most of the last 2 seasons. But they just haven't got that killer blow. I think it's time to change it up some way. Dylan Brown's got to find himself in the game, and I don't know whether he's ever. I think I might have mentioned this last Saturday as well. I don't know whether he's ever played fullback, but to get someone in a game like him as a ball runner, I'd like to see him run the ball more. So I'd probably swap him and Gutho, put Gutho to 5'8", and just try. You got to try something now. You lost 3 in a row. You're going backwards at a rate of knots. So let's change something around. Moses is back. He'll be better for the run. They're missing Campbell Gillard up front, but still, no excuses. Last night they met a team that wanted it more, and I'd be really disappointed if I was a Para fan.
I'd love to hear from Para fans. 133353.
I think they're going to be the story of the next 2 months, Parramatta. I just think from a media perspective, they're a huge club. They're struggling again at the end of a season. Their coach is about to enter the last year of his deal, and there's been talk all year that if they don't go well in the finals, Brad's on thin ice. So I think the next 4, 5, 6 weeks, they will be the story of the next 4 or 5 weeks because, basically, the top 4's, Parramatta will drop out of the top 4. They've got Manly, Storm, Penrith, 3 of their last 4 games. And it's hard to see them beating any of those teams. So they'll drop out of the top 4, you would imagine. And aside from that race to make the 8, I think there's such a big club and there's so much going on there at the moment, and there's going to be so much speculation over the coach and the roster moving forward. I just think they're going to be a huge story in the next 5 or 6 weeks, and Brad's going to have to do a good job to keep it all together and stop it falling apart, because right now it's got that potential. They've made some real strides, Parramatta, in recent years. They're a well-run club. I've got a lot of respect for the chairman, Sean McAuliffe, a really smart guy, really good operator. Jimmy Sarantinos, the CEO, just goes about his business quietly without any fanfare. But it just feels like they're on the edge of a precipice, and they could fall off it in the next 6 weeks.
I think that's the first time precipice has ever been used on the Saturday show. Really, congratulations.
Thank you, yeah.
Well done. How'd you work that in there? Have you played some sort of word bingo today?
That's it,
Again, spelled in the
But
quiz.
they're a huge club, Parramatta.
No, you're exactly right.
And there's people there who wonder, I did a story earlier this week on the amount of players that got coming off contract, and people at the club wonder, why are you writing that sort of stuff? I'll tell you why, because you're a huge club.
Yep.
And, in the media these days, if you're a big club, gets interest, people are intrigued by it, and you've got 7 players, I think it is, who are coming off contract in a year's time, who can go to market on November 1, and your season's sort of just in danger of falling apart. Your coach is off contract in a year's time. There's been discussion about him for months on end, and it's just, it's newsworthy, and
it's
it's
not-
going to continue to be newsworthy.
When you look at that roster, though, Reedy, you don't look at it and say they're a young side coming through. Let's give them a couple of years. You look at it and say, okay, well they've been building to what? And if they're not there now, are they going to get there? So is it a bad thing that they've got people coming off contract? Is it a bad thing that all of a sudden Brad, who's been there for 6 years now, who hasn't been able to get them into a finals position where I think there was 1 year where they went to Melbourne, they were unlucky in maybe a prelim or whatever it may have been to make the GF. But other than that, is it a bad thing that they need to make changes to that club? Because what they're doing at the moment, if they think they're in their premiership window, it's closing very fast and they just don't have the right people in the right positions.
So often we see the narrative that, the coach doesn't miss tackles and the coach doesn't, make mistakes on the ground. But the coach, in this instance anyway, as Goads mentioned, the last 6 years he's been the boss. He's got to take some of the blame. He's got to take some of the blame for A, what he's doing at training maybe, or B, the selections he's making, or C, the game plan he's coming up with, or D, the intensity that his team's playing with. It's a lot of the, we're saying the same thing with Madge at the Tigers. A lot of people say the narrative there, you can't blame him. Look at the players, but it does come from the top, and unfortunately, we are in a results-driven business. And Parramatta should be a top 4 team with that roster every day of the year, every day of the week. But at the moment, they're going backwards faster than going forwards.
I noticed Matty Johns yesterday wrote a piece, and he kind of compared Brad Arthur to a coach of somebody, an Olympic sprinter, and saying he's the kind of guy who gets them to run 10 threes. They get into the final, but he can't get them to get that down to that 9-8 that wins them a medal.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
And they've got themselves in a difficult position with Brad because they're not convinced yet. You can only assume they're not convinced yet that he's the man to take them forward because they haven't given him a contract extension. So they're saying, okay, let's sit back, let's see how you go in the finals.
He's contracted till next year.
His contract's till the end of next year.
Yeah.
But the word is that if they don't go on the finals, then that'll be it for him. So they've got themselves in a position where they're not willing to extend him and they're not ready to make a call yet on whether he's the man take them forward. So that's simmered along all year, and it's going to bubble over in the next 6 or 7 weeks because depending on what happens in the next 6 or 7 weeks, that's going to dictate what happens to him. So they're almost an impossible position, the club. It's
never a good thing either, Rudy, when you've got a coach under pressure in the last year of his deal and how much that, deflects and affects the group trying to be successful in 2022. They need to make that decision the end of this year, yeah?
Yeah.
Enzo is another Eels man.
Well, they're going to let him,
go into the last year.
Go into his last year
they
off
need to
contract.
make a call at the end of this, at some point soon.